Welcome to the Unique History Channel. Tonight we'll be doing a reading of the preface and intro of the National Bolshevist Manifesto by Karl Otto paetel. Translator's introduction on paetel. Karl Otto paetel was born into a solidly middle-class Berlin Charlottenburg family on November 23, 1906. The son of a bookseller, paetel developed literacy and intellectual interests early, and like most youths of his generation, his thinking and outlook was deeply affected by the experience of the Great War and Germany's subsequent post-war travails. The flourishing German youth movement, too, had a strong impact on his development. It was Paetel's involvement in various youth groups that helped reinforce his nationalist sentiments, as well as his appreciation for the comradeship that came of the activity within the framework of a tight-knit organization united around a common cause. In 1928, Paetel enrolled at Friedrich Wilhelm University in Berlin, studying philosophy and history with the intention of becoming a school teacher. Paetel's studies were brought to an end only 5 semesters later as a result of his early fortes into political activism, defying a ban on demonstrations. A mass of students descended on the French embassy in protest against the Treaty of Versailles, Paetel among them. To his shock, he soon found himself slung on the back of a police vehicle, stuffed in between a communist youth on one side and a National Socialist doctoral student on the other. The consequence of Paetel's arrest, once the university was alerted, was the loss of his scholarship and subsequent expulsion. With a sudden excess of free time on his hands, Paetel threw himself into journalism, writing articles for a variety of publications. He was particularly attracted to political subjects. Paetel at the time was still also active with the youth movement. By this point in his life, he had become a prominent figure in the hierarchy of the youth group, the Deutsche Freischar, an organization whose culture initially complemented his own nationalist sentiments. As he became more politically active, Paetel became much more strongly influenced by new nationalism popular at the time, a nationalism that positioned itself in the revolutionary camp and rejected the stateliness of the old Wilhelmine era. Inspired by the work of figures as Ernest Young, Ernest Niekisch, and August Vinney, Paetel's writing adopted an increasingly radical tone, his nationalism becoming imbued with a strong undercurrent of anti-capitalism. Yet, as his Paetel and his writings grew more radical, his position with the Deutsche Freischar became jeopardized. Paetel's open sympathy for communism, his approving references to Lenin, his declaration that revolutionary nationalists were the allies of the working classes, these sentiments were a step too far for the Freischar. After writing an article in 1930, which criticized President Hindenburg over Germany's ratification of the Young Plan, Paetel was forced to resign from his positions within the group. In May 1930, an increasingly radicalized Paetel decided to start taking serious political action. For a year, he and a number of friends had been working within an informal circle called the Young Front Working Circle, an advocacy organization to try rallying left and right-wing radicals to join together in a common cause. Now Paetel and his comrades chose to reorganize themselves as a formal group with a formal program seeking to do simply more than try and push the members of the NSADP towards real socialism. The group of social revolutionary nationalists, they formed subsequently and became one of the very few organizations in Weimar Germany which actually used the term National Bolshevist to describe itself. Avidly revolutionary, the GSRN advocated for the overthrow of the democratic capitalist system and for a new government based on councils, for socialization of industry and land, and for a military alliance with Soviet Russia and the arming of the masses of the People's Militia. The GSRN, whose members were, like Paetel, almost all of them educated, middle-class background, affirmed that it was the task of nationalists to work together within the class-conscious proletariat in pursuit of these goals. Despite this new sense of purpose, the initial focus of the GSRN was never a very large group. was on publishing and propaganda. An opportunity to engage in a more lively action soon was provided by the left. A debate within the GSRN over to support the NSADP, or the KPD, Communist Party of Germany, in the September 1930 elections was suddenly resolved with the KPD's publication of its new party program for the national and social liberation of the German people. This new program was replete with nationalist language and demands, a deliberate attempt by the KPD to win back voters or lost potentially to the NSDAP. The GSRN, however, saw it as political evidence that the KPD was drifting in a National Bolshevist direction, so paetel and his comrades threw their firm support behind the communists. The GSRN thus became an ally of the KPD. Paetel and his group publicly supported the KPD during the election, writing articles, distributing propaganda, and speaking at communist rallies. This cooperation continued on after the election, with the GSRN imploring nationals to fight side by side with the KPD, declaring that only under the banners of communism would Germany be able to crush the capitalism and liberate itself from the imperialism of the Versailles powers. GSRN members wrote articles for communist journals, joined KPD organizations like Anti-Fascist Action, and in March and April 1932, they offered public support for the presidential campaign of the KPD leader Ernst Thälmann. The KPD, for its part, provided its own form of support at times, such as assisting in the distribution of GSRN National Socialist Nation, but overall the relationship was a fairly one-sided. It was this lack of reciprocity which led to a measure of disillusionment in the GSRN. Paetel came to suspect, quite rightly, that the KPD was hoping to co-opt and absorb his movement. Furthermore, by late 1932, he and his comrades had come to doubt the sincerity of KPD's nationalism. As KPD-GSRN relations deteriorated, the ideological divisions between the two groups became more apparent. Paetel and his compatriots could no longer easily evade the fact that their end goal of a National Socialist sovereign Germany state, allied but independent of a sovereign Russia, was fundamentally different to the ultimate goal of the KPD, borderless world communism. Although still pro-communist and supportive of the KPD, this division influenced the GSRN's tactics, with Paetel attempting to organize a separate National Communist Party to compete in the November 1932 elections, an effect which failed to the GSRN simply lacking the manpower and resources needed to bring forth a new legal political party. The National Bolshevist Manifesto was published by Paetel as the second attempt to organize a national communist electoral group at this time during the late 1932 to 1933, when Germany was in political shambles. The NSADP was bleeding support, and the KDP was gaining votes but struggling with internal faction disputes, and the entire Weimar system seemed on the verge of collapse. Yet events overtook Paetel in a fashion he had not predicted, and distributed on the manifesto he had labored over for the first was published and distributed on January 30th, 1933, the day Hitler became Chancellor, and victorious torch-bearing stormtroopers marched in mass columns through the streets of Berlin. Many of the copies of the manifesto were confiscated and suppled. Paetel's publication license was swiftly withdrawn, and the publications he and his comrades were shut down. The GSRN did not last much longer, being banned along with all other communist and fellow traveler groups in the aftermath of the Reichstag fire. From that point onwards, Paetel experienced insignificant harassment from the government, particularly as he continued to associate with figures considered unsavory to the National Socialist regime. His name was included on a blacklist of suspected traitors During the events of the 1934 Blood Purge, the Night of the Long Knives, and in 1935, things had become so heated that Patel was forced to flee Germany for his own safety. After some time moving around Europe, he ended up in America, where he managed to find employment as an academic and eventually attained citizenship. In his later life, Patel published a number of different works, several of them dealing with the long history of German National Bolshevism. He died in New York in 1975. Translator's introduction on the translation. The translation was made over the course of several months from early to mid-2019. From the next page onwards, everything as far as possible is a replica in terms of the content and style of Patel's original National Bolshevist Manifesto. All the numbered footnotes with text are Patel's, translated from the original German. The only change that's ever been made to them is put into some order. Whether due to a printing error or complications in formatting and layout, the German version of the manifesto does not order all the footnotes subsequently. The details for footnote 59, for instance, are preceded by footnote 60 and footnote 58. For the sake of my sanity and that of the readers, I have fixed this for the English translation. Patel in the manifesto makes extensive reference to newspapers, journals, books, and articles. Mostly the original newspapers and journals Patel makes reference to have had their German names left untranslated to make their identification easier. Books and articles have their names translated to make their contents appear more apparent to the reader, but the original German names are provided in brackets and italics, and like so, for anyone interested in tracking them down. The only works I have avoided in this which are already widely known in the English-speaking words, such as Marx, Lenin, Trotsky, and Junger. At times, in the text, I have included the original German word for a phrase alongside an English translation. I hope you enjoy this work. Please feel free to distribute it wherever you like. If you have access to the German original, there are PDF copies available online, and believe you can improve the translation, then please feel free to do so. The most important thing is that Patel's writings are available. I have no special claim to them, and if you have any questions, criticisms, or suggestions, feel free to contact me. Okay, thank you.